Good evening and welcome. Tonight I'm going to be reading to you from this book about Oregon, the Beaver State. This is part of my Viewer's Choice series, and this topic was chosen by Bertha Brands 7853. Just put Oregon. That's enough. I've actually been to Oregon many times, but only like Southern Oregon and Portland, Oregon. I've been through Salem, but haven't really explored a lot of Central Oregon. But Oregon's a neat place. And yes, that is how you pronounce it. If you're not American, it's not Oregon, it's Oregon. Like an organ in your body. I figured out of this book I'm going to read to you the history section. So we're going to learn the history of Oregon tonight. Let's see. From the beginning. The first people who arrived in Oregon discovered, as did those who came later, that the region contained a wealth of native foods and natural resources. Scientific DNA tests reveal that the first inhabitants of Oregon came from North Asia. They were nomads who hunted large prehistoric animals such as woolly mammoths. It is believed that these hunters tracked the mammoths across a land bridge that connected what is now Alaska and Russia. New discoveries in an ancient cave at a national archaeological site in Paisley, Oregon, have suggested that these first people living in Oregon may have been some of the earliest people to arrive in North America, possibly 14,000 years ago. About 7,500 years ago, the climate of the continent began changing and the area grew warmer. Ice melted and lakes and rivers formed. New species of plants and animals began to flourish. With new plants to gather and new and smaller animals to hunt, the early nomads began settling down. Native Americans of Oregon. The present-day Native Americans of Oregon are descendants of these nomads. Since the first settlements, the native people have relied on the natural bounty of the region. Native Americans of the coast, such as the Tillamook and the Umpqua, feasted on salmon, shellfish, and sea mammals. They fashioned nets made from plants and placed them in the mouths of rivers to catch migrating salmon. Along the cliffs of the Columbia, Deschutes, and Rogue rivers, Native American fishers built platforms that extended over the rushing water and dropped their nets. The fertile soil in the Willamette Valley and the Rogue River Valley provided other tribes, such as the Molalla and the Klamath, with wild fruits, nuts, and nutritious roots. The most important root was camas, which tastes like sweet potato. People boiled camas to make a soup, or dried the root into little cakes to store for winter. Tribes living in the many forests used trees to build homes, tools, and boats. The forest people hunted animals that lived in the woods, such as rabbit, deer, and elk. They crafted bows and arrows or wove rope nets to capture their prey. The groups that settled in the eastern section of present-day Oregon, such as the Paiute, hunted, fished, and gathered seeds for food, grasses for clothing, and found enough wood to provide bark and timber to build their homes and boats. But because climate and geography varies from region to region, the natural resources and lifestyles of the native people also varied. Groups from different areas had different foods and tools, so the people developed a successful trading system. For example, coastal tribes traded seashells, dried fish, and cedar baskets with tribes from central Oregon in exchange for animal hides, meat, and obsidian to make arrowheads and knives. The first Europeans. It was not until the middle of the 16th century that Europeans reached the land that would one day be called Oregon. Some of the first Europeans were Spanish naval explorers who were looking for gold. They had heard rumors about secret cities filled with gold in North America. They sailed their ships northward from Mexico, looking for a river that would allow them to sail deeper into the North American continent. But when their ships reached the area around present-day Oregon, heavy storms kept them from getting any closer than the rugged Pacific shoreline. Once the rumors of gold spread, many European countries became interested in the Pacific Northwest. Over the years, many countries sent ships along the coast, looking for rivers that would give them access inland. Settlers from Russia and Britain set up fur trading posts in what is now Alaska and western Canada. Spanish settlers built outposts in the region that includes California. Each of these countries, at one time or another, claimed the land of the Pacific Northwest. In 1775, the Spanish explorer Bruno de Heceta may have been the first European to find the mouth of the Columbia River. He claimed the surrounding region for Spain. 3 years later, the British explorer Captain James Cook sailed up Oregon's coast. He landed in an area he named Cape Foulweather and discovered the thriving fur trade along the coast. In 1788, Captain John Mears and Captain Robert Gray sailed from Boston to the Oregon coast. While their ships waited off the coast, Native American fur traders paddled their canoes to meet them. In 1792, Robert Gray successfully guided his ship into the same wild and dangerous river that Heceta had found. He sailed past the area John Mears had named Cape Disappointment and anchored in the calmer waters of the river's estuary. He was the first white explorer to actually enter the river. Gray named the river after his ship, the Columbia Rediviva. Other American explorers soon followed, and their discoveries helped support the United States' claim to the land that would become known as the Oregon Country. The Lewis and Clark Expedition. In 1803, under President Thomas Jefferson's leadership, the United States bought a large area of land called the Louisiana Territory from France. This deal, called the Louisiana Purchase, gave the United States land that extended east to west from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains. It included all or part of 14 current U.S. states. With this land, the country doubled in size, but Jefferson wanted the United States to extend from the Atlantic to the Pacific Oceans. He also wanted to find a water route from the eastern United States to the Pacific. To make part of that dream come true, he organized a group of explorers called the Corps of Discovery. Jefferson wanted this group to go west and learn as much about the land as possible, to make maps, and to befriend the native people. The Corps would travel by boat up the Missouri River to its farthest point and search for a water route that would continue to the Pacific Ocean. Jefferson appointed former Army Captain Meriwether Lewis to lead the group, and Lewis asked another former officer, William Clark, to be the co-leader of what became known as the Lewis and Clark Expedition. Lewis and Clark began their trip in 1804. By the late summer of 1805, they had traveled as far as they could up the Missouri River and reached the western boundary of the Louisiana Territory. They did not find a water route from there to the Pacific. No such route existed. Instead, they traveled overland across the Rocky Mountains. Continuing west, they eventually journeyed by boat down the Snake and Columbia rivers and by November 1805 they reached the mouth of the Columbia River and the Pacific Ocean. It had been a difficult journey, and the men of the Corps of Discovery were relieved to have finally reached the Pacific. Patrick Gass, a member of the expedition, wrote that upon arriving at the Columbia River, they saw the country all round is level, rich, and beautiful. The Corps built a log fort, which they named Fort Clatsop, after a friendly local tribe, and spent the winter there. Sacagawea, a Shoshone woman, joined Lewis and Clark in North Dakota and traveled with them to the Oregon coast. She was an important addition to the Corps of Discovery for her knowledge of several native languages and for her expertise in identifying edible plants and fruits. At one point, one of the group's canoes capsized, and she quickly rescued all the journals, medicines, and other valuables aboard. She remained with the Corps over their miserably wet winter at Fort Clatsop, and later joined the Mandan tribe in North Dakota. Lewis and Clark's trip proved to be a difficult but very important journey. As a result of their exploration, a path was forged that many settlers would soon follow. Although Lewis and Clark did not find the water route they were looking for, reports about their adventures and about the natural resources of the region they had explored inspired thousands of other people to move west. Fur trappers and missionaries. Fur traders and trappers came to present-day Oregon from all over the United States, Canada, which was controlled by Great Britain in the early 1800s, and Russia. They were eager to hunt beavers and otters or trade with the Native Americans for pelts that could be sold for high prices. In 1811, John Jacob Astor built a permanent settlement at the mouth of the Columbia River. Astor was one of America's first millionaires. He bought pelts and sold them to Chinese traders in exchange for silk and porcelain, which he sold to wealthy Americans and Europeans. He named his company the Pacific Fur Company. This settlement became the town of Astoria. Yet survival was difficult. The waters were rough and ships sank. The weather was often stormy, and shipments of supplies were few. The War of 1812 broke out, and Astor and his men feared an attack by the British. They abandoned their fort and sold the company. The new owner, the Hudson Bay Company, established fur trading outposts along the Columbia, Snake, and Willamette rivers, as well as in southeastern Oregon. The company encouraged trappers and traders to set up villages and farms and to build friendly relationships with Native Americans. The missionaries came next. Missionaries traveled west, hoping to convert the Native Americans to Christianity. It is possible that missionaries came to Oregon as a result of incorrect information. In 1832, a newspaper article reported that 4 members of the Nez Perce tribe had traveled to St. Louis, Missouri. They may have been looking for William Clark, who was working as the superintendent of Native American affairs in the Louisiana Territory. Many believe that the group had come in search of better tools and weapons, which they had seen used by members of the Lewis and Clark expedition. The press reported, however, that they were looking for a new religion and wanted to become Christians. Once missionaries heard this, many of them made plans to travel west. In 1834, a minister named Jason Lee set up a permanent settlement in the Willamette Valley, near a village of former fur trappers by present-day Salem. 2 years later, the most famous of the missionaries, Marcus and Narcissa Whitman, set out for Oregon. They settled at the base of the Blue Mountains on the Walla Walla River among the Cayuse tribe. The Whitmans held church services, taught school, and practiced medicine. Their success encouraged many Americans to make the trip to Oregon along a route that became known as the Oregon Trail. The Oregon Trail. By the 1840s, people were pouring into the Oregon country via the Oregon Trail. Thousands of wagon trains made the difficult journey, which for many of the pioneers began in Independence, Missouri, and following part of the route taken by Lewis and Clark, ended just south of Portland, the small town of Oregon City. The trip was more than 2,000 miles long, and often took 4 to 5 months to complete. The trail crossed 3 mountain ranges, the Rocky Mountains, the Blue Mountains, and the Cascades. Most people packed their belongings in large covered wagons, usually pulled by a team of oxen, and walked alongside. Many people died during the journey, but this did not stop others eager for a new life from developing Oregon fever and venturing west. Who else out there played Oregon Trail? Is Oregon Trail, the video game, a thing outside of the United States? Because we were like almost required to play it in school because it was educational. But if you're still awake and watching, if you played Oregon Trail, tell me the weirdest way you died on the Oregon Trail. Mine was definitely a 4th of July celebration where I was accidentally shot by like pew pew guns in the air. But anyway, like leave a comment if you died of dysentery. Road to statehood. In the early 1800s, both the United States and Great Britain claimed the Oregon country, a region largely made up of the current states of Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, and most of the Canadian province of British Columbia. Under an 1818 treaty, the United States and Britain agreed to share the region. In 1831, the United States and Spain, which controlled California, established the present-day southern border of Oregon. But as more and more Americans traveled the Oregon Trail and settled in the Oregon Territory, the U.S. government claimed that the United States should not share control of the area with Britain. In 1846, the two nations reached a compromise. Britain gave up its claim to land south of what is now the northern border of Washington state, and the United States gave up its claim to the land north of that border. With the dispute over control of the region resolved, many settlers in what is now Oregon wanted their new homeland to become a state. As a step in that direction, in 1848, Congress passed a measure, which was signed by President James K. Polk, establishing the Oregon Territory. The territory originally included the land that would eventually become the states of Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, as well as parts of Montana and Wyoming. 2 years later, Congress passed the Oregon Donation Land Act. This law gave 320 acres of free land to anyone who promised to plant crops on it. The offer of free land brought a new wave of people to Oregon. In 1851, gold was discovered in southern and eastern Oregon. By the 1860s, Oregon, like California before it, experienced a gold rush. With all these trappers, missionaries, settlers, and gold miners rushing into Oregon, the Native American population began to suffer. In 1805, it was estimated that more than 40,000 Native Americans lived in the region. Their numbers were decreasing, however. The trappers and other new residents were hunting and killing animals that the Native Americans had once relied on for food. The settlers were claiming land that had belonged to the Native Americans. The miners polluted the waters when they dug for gold, killing fish and making the water unsafe to drink. White people also carried diseases such as smallpox and measles, to which the Native Americans had never been exposed and had no natural immunity. In 1847, at the Whitman Mission, A measles epidemic struck the white children and Cayuse children alike. The white children survived, but the Cayuse children died. The Cayuse believed the deaths were an attempt by the Whitmans to steal their land to make room for the new white settlers. A group of Cayuse warriors attacked the mission buildings, killing the Whitmans and 12 other white settlers. A white militia responded by attacking some Cayuse who had not been involved in the first incident. The conflict escalated into the Cayuse War, which lasted until 1850. There were also tensions between settlers and other tribes. More wars followed, including the Rogue River War of 1835 to 1855 to 1856. Native Americans were not able to drive out the white settlers, but they fought to protect and reclaim their land. Federal troops became involved, and many Native Americans were moved to reservations. Oh, here's it saying it's Oregon. By 1857, the Oregon Territory had been divided in two, a smaller Oregon Territory and a separate Washington Territory. A convention was called to write a state constitution for Oregon. 2 years later, on February 14th, 1859, Oregon, with its present boundaries, became the 33rd state. Conflicts between white settlers and tribal groups persisted after statehood. In 1877, the U.S. Army ordered Chief Joseph, leader of the Nez Perce, to take his people from their traditional home in eastern Oregon to a reservation in present-day Idaho. Angered, Nez Perce warriors raided a settlement and killed several whites. Chief Joseph tried to escape by leading his people toward Canada, but the U.S. troops followed them, and several battles were fought. The band of Nez Perce was no match for the U.S. Army, and so in the bitter cold, many of the Nez Perce froze or starved to death. With so much loss, Chief Joseph surrendered, saying, "I am tired, my heart is sick and sad. From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever." Army troops forced the chief and his small remaining band to a reservation in present-day Oklahoma, where many died from disease. By the end of the 1800s, fewer than 10,000 Native Americans remained in the state. Modern times and growing pains. When a transcontinental railroad line reached Oregon in the 1880s, enabling people to go from the eastern United States to Oregon by train, travel to the new state became much easier. The number of people living in Oregon grew rapidly. Between 1900 and 1910, for instance, Portland's population grew from about 90,000 to more than 200,000. Some of the people who arrived in Oregon during this time were not as interested in being farmers or ranchers as the settlers who had come before them. Many of these new residents were used to living in cities, so they developed Oregon cities instead, building new stores and other types of businesses. The capital of Salem was named after Salem, Massachusetts. Portland was named after Portland, Maine, after a coin toss between a man from Maine and a man from Massachusetts who wanted to name the new city Boston. The man from Maine won the coin toss, and the coin he used is on display at the Oregon Historical Society in Portland. The railroad also provided a way of transporting goods from Oregon to other parts of the nation. Wheat and lumber grown in Oregon could now be shipped east. This meant that more people could buy these products, and Oregon's economy began to grow. Factories were built in Oregon cities, creating jobs for many residents. Hard times hit Oregon and the rest of the nation with the Great Depression. Starting in 1929, this was a period of time when the country's economy was in terrible shape. Banks and businesses closed, and many people lost their jobs in their homes. the federal government established programs to help the unemployed find work while also rebuilding the country. Workers were hired for such projects as constructing roads, logging forests, and building dams. Many Oregonians helped build the Bonneville Dam, which was completed in 1938. By taming the current of the Columbia River, the dam helped create electric power for homes and businesses throughout the Pacific Northwest. The reservoir behind the dam provided irrigation water for farms too. The availability of inexpensive electricity also helped to make Portland one of the nation's major shipbuilding centers. World War II began in Europe in 1939, with the United States joining the war in December 1941 after Japan attacked the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. In June 1942, a Japanese submarine fired shells on Fort Stevens at the mouth of the Columbia River on the Oregon side. It was the only time during World War II that there was hostile shelling of a military base on the U.S. mainland. Factories needed workers to make supplies for the war effort. Oregon's urban areas became important manufacturing centers for war materials, and the state's farms helped supply the troops with food. The war helped improve the U.S. economy. After World War II ended, Oregon entered a period of relative prosperity. There was increased demand for the state's lumber and beef, and electricity was brought to remote areas. As a result of the tapping of new water sources, land that had once been dry could now be planted. New highway construction helped bring tourists to see the state's wonders. There were challenges, however, for some people. Small farmers faced increased competition from larger farms whose owners could afford new machinery and chemicals for their crops. The overall rural farm population dropped, causing hardships for small towns. It was also during the 1950s and 1960s that Oregonians began to notice that some of their industries were causing great environmental damage. Factories had turned the Willamette River into a sewer, contaminating the water with their waste. In other places, entire mountainsides had been stripped of trees by the lumber industry. This caused dangerous mudslides that clogged rivers and damaged homes. Oregonians became determined to make their state healthy again. Oregon enacted laws to protect and clean up the environment. By the 1970s, Oregon became the state with the most laws protecting animals and other natural resources. The tradition continues today. I think that's it. Oh no, there's one more page. Oregon today. Important to talk about. Oregon is rich in natural resources. Those resources, however, need protection and conservation. Today, the people of Oregon know that they cannot overfish their rivers or the fish will become endangered. They know that if too many forests are cleared by the logging industry, this clearing will destroy plant and animal habitats and cause mudslides. Oregonians are committed to keeping their state healthy and clean. This not only makes Oregon a fine place to live, it also attracts people from other states who enjoy visiting Oregon's beaches, mountains, and deserts. The money that tourists spend helps to create jobs. Although Oregon is changing, in many ways it also remains the same. Just as in the pioneer days, people from all over the nation still hear that Oregon is a desirable place to live. In fact, it is among the fastest growing states in the nation, with its diverse population increasing 12% between 2000 and 2010. The air quality is good, the temperatures are mild, and the natural environment offers many exciting outdoor activities. Traveling to Oregon is far easier than it was hundreds of years ago, And when people come to the state, they still find a land of green rolling hills and a wonderful place to establish a new home. And that is the end of our book for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found this video relaxing and educational. And I hope that you have a